The story of Grizzly Adams is one of the most amazing frontier biographies ever documented. A Western mountain man legend, Grizzly Adams was originally known as John Adams from the time he was born in Medway, Massachusetts in 1812. He was the second eldest of 7 siblings who grew up in a rural farm household run by his father and mother, Eleazar and Sibyl Adams. His impressive American family tree included 2 United States presidents and Revolutionary War patriot Samuel Adams. As he grew to manhood, John Adams recognized a unique ability he had when it came to understanding the behavior of wild animals. This talent came in handy when he was hired to help manage a collection of exotic animals shipped over from Africa. The 21-year-old Adams worked hard during this until fate played its hand when he was nearly killed by a Royal Bengal tiger. Then, after enduring a year-long recovery process, he opted for a safer trade as shoe cobbler, something his father had arranged for him to apprentice at during his teen years. In due time, the still young John Adams started his own business making shoes and boots in Boston, just as former President John Adams, his father, had done. He also married and began raising a family there. In 1849, however, when he was 36, he and his father lost their combined savings in a business venture that went up in flames. The end result was financial ruin for both, which led to his father taking his own life. After that, Adams left Boston, a broken man, to head west with a multitude of great California Gold Rush participants, promising to send money home when he could. In California, as Adams put it, after the numerous hardships and privations he endured getting there, he settled near Stockton, where he began mining for gold. He was industrious and soon became a landowner and an employer of several men who helped run his own sluice operation. Unfortunately, though, his trusting nature enabled low-end business sharks to repeatedly con him out of his gold claims. And by late 1852, he had had enough and decided to turn back to civilization. Disgusted and disheartened, Adams set out with some meager provisions loaded on a creaky ox cart destined for the highland wilderness of Central California. After trekking a hard 200 miles, he stopped in the Sierra Nevada mountains near the Great Yosemite Valley. And it was there he built a cabin surrounded by wildlife and Native American tribes, just in time for winter to set in. He would later recall that period of solitude as one of the most satisfying times in his entire life. While adapting to his new environment, Adams learned to commune with nature and to become an expert hunter, tracker, and provider for himself and his Moic Indian neighbors. As well, beyond engaging in his newfound hobby of collecting a wide variety of wild animals, he also endeavored to capture, raised, and trained grizzly bears, lending to his later giving nickname of Grizzly Adams. Using some of his trained bears as pack animals, Grizzly Adams led many tracking expeditions far and wide through the western frontier, always disembarking from his Central California encampment. He not only managed to traverse the bulk of California, but he trekked well beyond its limits, as far north as the Canadian border, as far south as the Mojave Desert, and as far east as Salt Lake City. He generally hired Indian scouts to help him on his journeys as well, further solidifying his relationships with different tribal leaders as his Grizzly Adams legend grew. So much marked a key difference with Grizzly Adams when compared to other mountain men of his era, when often boasting themselves to be Indian hunters as well. This included many down-on-their-luck gold miners, making under $1 a day, who found it hard to resist the $5 each offer for Native American scalps. Grizzly Adams saw things differently. He spoke highly of the integrity of the Native Americans he befriended, worked with, and traded with. He also described them as fair and honest in their lives of doings, and he greatly valued the symbolic relationship he nurtured with them. For a few years into 1856, Grizzly Adams tracked, hunted, and collected animals for a living during his self-exiled mountain man life. Until he grew tired of roughing it and opted to relocate to San Francisco after being offered a chance to make money by putting on shows with his live bears and other animals. Note, Grizzly Adams was erroneously described in some accounts as a person who had hunted relentlessly in the mountains for 10 years. This was far from the truth. The total time he spent in California mountain ranges was about 2.5 years, during which time he scouted, hunted, and traded with Native Americans who much appreciated the supplement of meats and furs his skill and Kentucky rifle afforded them. Not to leave out, hunting was a way of life back then, and famous frontiersmen such as Davy Crockett and Daniel Boone were also renowned for their prowess at that. It is true, though, different hunting methods common in the 1800s are unthinkable today, with many having been outlawed over the years. In 1856, Grizzly Adams entered San Francisco in grand fashion with a parade on Market Street featuring his large menagerie of bears and other animals. He settled in and began running his enterprise there, readapted to city life as well, and in due time he and his Mountaineer Museum became so popular that news reporters started to take notice. One young reporter in particular, Theodore Hiddle, wrote an impressive series of articles about Grizzly Adams and his animals, leading the citified mountain man to attain celebrity status. Adams was initially billed as the Wild Yankee at Thomas Maguire's opulent opera house and his Theater Americana in San Francisco, but the name was soon replaced by his more recognizable moniker, Grizzly Adams. For 4 years, Grizzly Adams regularly performed with his bears and other animals in his Carnival Mountaineer Museum and San Francisco's most notable theater venues, with his favorite grizzly bear companions, Benjamin Franklin, Lady Washington, Funny Joe, and General Fremont. He embraced his newfound notoriety that left him greeting the likes of future Civil War General William Sherman, Levi Strauss, Domingo Gardello, and the indomitable Lola Montez, a.k.a. the Countess of Lansfield, in her European days. Miss Montez had her own pet grizzly bear and was known for performing her infamous spider dance to throngs of wage-spending miners, and for her dalliances with some San Francisco's upper-crust male denions. Within the sordid political scene of San Francisco then, Grizzly Adams also witnessed Governor Neely Johnson's controversial vigilantes movement of the mid-1850s that had been assembled to curtail the city's reputed lawlessness. Notwithstanding the city's many other entrapments, Grizzly Adams ended up enjoying his new life there more than he anticipated he would. Always wearing his buckskins, he could often be seen trolling with his favorite bear, being by his side on Kearny Street to one of the several different restaurants he would dine at, while the docile bear remained tethered outside in his sight. His extensive overhead required significant funding, though, as the bulk of his animals, especially his bears, had special boarding needs that require much tending from hired help and so much food that it proved difficult for the mountain man turned showman to get ahead financially. No matter for Theodore Hiddle, the aforementioned young reporter who wrote for the San Francisco Bulletin, was so taken by Grizzly Adams that he ended up with enough journals about the mountain man to compile a vast chronological account of his fascinating adventures. For whatever reason, Grizzly Adams, who often used aliases while out west, used the name of his brother James, along with his mother's maiden name, to identify himself to Hittell, leaving him to be mistakenly attributed in Hittell's later published work about him, James Capon Adams. As the novelty of his animal shows began to fade, fate again stepped in to play his hand with Grizzly Adams. First, he sustained a head wound during a wrestling expedition with one of his bears that proved difficult to heal. Not too long after that, in 1859, an unknown illness caused the death of his star bear, Benjamin Franklin, that left Adams heartbroken. Realizing his health was in jeopardy due to his head wound and still grieving over the loss of Ben, Grizzly Adams began longing for home and decided to leave San Francisco to head back to the East Coast, to New York specifically, with as many of his animals as he could load onto a ship that would sail him around Cape Horn on a long Noah's Ark-like adventure. He departed the San Francisco Bay Harbor in early January of 1860 aboard the clipper Golden Fleece that he loaded over 60 animals onto, including his remaining bears, some foxes, wolves, antelope, a bald eagle, a few reptiles, and a giant sea lion. The arduous journey took 3 months, and Adams, with his head already injured from bear wrestling, re-injured it during the ocean voyage. This time, enough to where it left him coming to terms with the sharp reality that he would never recover. Grizzly Adams, as tough as they came, though, and he arrived in New York City, he again proudly paraded his troop of bears and other animals on Broadway, while heading for the office of P.T. Barnum, where the famous showman, who had already purchased an interest in Adams' impressive menagerie, quickly signed him to a performance contract. As Barnum's Old Grizzly Adams act became wildly popular in New York City, Adams was also reunited with his wife, Selina, who had managed to send some money to a few times during his long absence. The couple's reunion was bittersweet as Adams' health began falling to a point where Selina found herself serving as a nurse for her decade-long estranged husband in between his performance. By the fall of 1860, John Grizzly Adams could no longer perform, and Selena felt it was best that he returned to Boston so he could spend his last days with his family. Grizzly Adams soon after died on October 25, 1860, 3 days after his 48th birthday, and just a few weeks before the election of Abraham Lincoln as president. P.T. Barnum paid for Adams' funeral and burial in Charlton, Massachusetts, the same place Adams' father, Eliezer, had hung himself in 1849. His headstone is still there today. His wife, Selena, and one of their daughters are buried near him. There is no measuring the influence Grizzly Adams had on P.T. Barnum, especially when it came to the way the famous show promoter viewed the profitable future of circus animals. The legendary Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus that lasted well in the 21st century bore testament to that. Certainly Adams was one of the original American animal pageant leaders to parade a large troop of exotic wild beasts into major cities, a tradition that stuck with all major circus acts later on, mostly for practical reasons, especially with elephants. Some of his animals also contributed to the startups of both the San Francisco and the New York City zoos. It was even remarked how into the 20th century, descendants of a few animals once owned and raised by Grizzly Adams were still attractions in both places. All this aside, no doubt the most unnoticed part of Grizzly Adams' historic legacy appears on a famous flag. Few people realize it, how the same bear image for well over 100 years, situated on California state flag, was remodeled after a grizzly bear named Samson, painted by famous Western artist Charles Nahl in 1855. A huge live bear that was originally captured and owned by California's greatest mountain man ever, one and only, Grizzly Adams.